pet. 14, almost half of us have grieved during this last year over the loss of whatever it might be, freedom, independence, and then other unidentified things that we didn't think of. So just kind of interesting to know who's in the room, that you have a lot of people who've gone through something similar to you. And that's really important to know, because when we're grieving, it's very common to think, oh, I'm the only one. There's nobody else who's gone through what I've gone through. And yet we have all experienced grief in some way, and that's some kind of loss. So we thought, I'll just give you a little bit of my background, and then I'd like to take you through a soft landing to help just calm yourself down. It's what I love to do. So my background is working with people, largely in schools, nonprofits, universities, and some businesses, to help people manage their emotions, to build resilience, the ability to move through difficult situations by training your mind to know what you're paying attention to and what you're not paying attention to, so that you're simply aware of what's driving your thoughts and your feelings and your behaviors. And so compassion for today is what is going to be our focus. Compassion is that ability to turn towards the difficult to alleviate suffering. It's that desire to want to soften a challenge, a difficulty, some kind of, suffering. And it could be for yourself, or it could be for somebody else. And there's two different ways to do that, just in a very broadly speaking. One way is through action, taking action, like a fireman or a doctor or maybe an athletic coach. They're using that fierce compassion to sort of save people or discipline somebody. Sometimes parenting involves some of that compassionate action, but the kind of compassion we're going to talk about today is called being with somebody. That ability to be with somebody and recognize with them or for yourself that there's some pain or suffering, and then having that desire to soften it or to alleviate it. So in this first practice called soft landing, it's called affectionate breathing. I just thought I would take you through about 3 minutes of turning towards yourself and softening towards yourself. And sometimes you don't really recognize, like, this is hard, but it is hard. So it's hard to sit through a Zoom for an hour or two sometimes, right? Because it's just in one place, your body starts to ache, you have to go to the bathroom, whatever. So those things are considered challenges or discomfort in mindfulness. It doesn't have to be the major kind of loss that we identified in the poll. Okay, so if you want, it'll be about 3 minutes, and you're welcome to turn your screen off if you want. I'm going to ask you just to find a comfortable position to sit, and where your body is comfortable, but your mind is still alert. And if your eyes are open, just looking down to steady your mind, or closing your eyes if you feel like it. And just beginning by settling into your body. So relaxing the shoulders, and feel like you're sitting. Feel your body sitting on the chair, so that you know, I have a body. Maybe softening the jaws and the eyes. Feeling your legs on the chair. And then become aware that you're breathing. So as you breathe in, feel maybe the body expanding around the ribs or the belly, or even feeling the air coming in your nose. And when you breathe out, be aware that you're breathing out. So there's no right or wrong way to do this, just being aware that you're breathing, that your body is responding to each breath. And now the compassionate part is, I want you to bring a kind and gentle attention to yourself. The same kind of attention you might bring to an infant or to a puppy. And maybe even putting your hand on your heart or your cheek to feel that warmth. So just getting that sensation of I can soften to myself, I can bring that comfort and soothe my own emotions. Taking a couple more breaths. And when you're ready, maybe putting your hand down, letting go of your breath, and just before opening your eyes or turning your camera on, taking a moment to notice what you experienced. What did that softening, if you sense that, what did that feel like in your body? And then when you're ready, opening your eyes. And then turning your camera back on.
Susan, thank you for that. It reminds me of why our friendship has grown so much over the last, I think it's 8 years now, when actually Sarah Hermanoff, who's on this call, who's a friend of mine, recommended that I reach out to you and have you actually record me 2 weeks after I had my own brain surgery. She knew that you were very empathetic, and I knew you from the community, but I got to know you so much better. And over the years, we've talked about so many of these topics, and you helped me as I was writing the book. And now here we are doing this together. So I'm really happy that I guess it's a silver lining of my brain surgery. And as you can imagine, I'm doing fine from it. But it was a little unusual that I ended up having a brain tumor diagnosis when my daughter passed away from a different type of brain tumor. So you never know what life is going to throw you.
That's exactly right. So, what do you want to talk about next, Susan?
I think, well, I do know that one of the things that you actually taught me about body scans, and you helped me calm my racing thoughts after the brain surgery and during my grief. And you introduced me to some of these concepts that I was very unfamiliar with at the time. And I remember going to one of your summer mindfulness classes. I think it was in the summer of 2013. And I remember one exercise that still stays with me is when you asked everyone to close their eyes, and you passed out something that we didn't know what it was, and it was slices of hot pepper. And you told everyone to put the hot pepper on our lips and to just be with that sensation. And I can still remember that hot pepper burning my bottom lip and thinking to myself, I can manage this. I can get through this pain and kind of accept the pain rather than fighting it. And that was very healing to me, to know that I had that power.
Yeah.
And then the session ended with a 4-hour silent retreat where you could not look at anyone and you needed to be with your thoughts. And I remember thinking that is going to be very difficult. But what I had realized that is because during the grieving of Laura, I had really confronted the pain, the painful emotions. So I was able to be with myself, and I had kind of, I was comfortable with myself.
Yeah.
And so that's what maybe Susan can explain more about.
Okay. So I think what you're talking about, Susan, is sometimes the anticipation of what's going to happen, the fears are greater than what actually does happen. And the exercise that we brought you through was a jalapeno. We gave you a jalapeno and we were asking you to put the jalapeno on your lip. And that's a scary thing to do for most of us. Some people love jalapenos and it's never too hot, but for most people to put part of it right on your mouth is, at least back then, because it was a while ago, it's kind of scary. And so the same thing I believe is true in some ways at some times for grief, that sometimes the fear of what you might anticipate experiencing might be worse than, put it this way, if you can learn how to feel, you started with the concept of the body, if you can learn how to know what you're going to feel when you feel grief, it becomes less frightening, less scary. So grief, like a lot of stress profiles, can show up unexpectedly, but it often has the same physical patterns in your body. And so for me, when I think of a moment when I went through some grief, especially this kind that comes on really suddenly and unexpectedly, that I think I saw you going through right at the beginning of the call, Susan, or of this Zoom call. Like in the beginning, like I could feel this emotion welling up inside you, being surrounded by friends and sharing some intimate feelings. So that kind of grief for me comes really suddenly, like an explosion in my heart, and then my throat gets tight, and then my body kind of bounces a little bit with all that energy inside of it. And then I have to like stop to just breathe because I find I'm holding my breath. So I would call that my stress profile for grief. So that when that would arise, I would notice it and go, oh, this is grief coming on. And I knew what it was, so it wasn't so scary. And I would know I'm going to go through these 4 or 5 different physical experiences.
Susan, I wish I had known that when I was going through the grief, because you're absolutely correct that that grief causes actual physical symptoms. I remember a week after Laura had died, I was lying on the couch and I physically felt like I was having a heart attack. And my heart was racing and it felt very heavy on my chest. And I actually had to ask a friend who was a doctor to kind of take my pulse and reassure me.
Yes, yes.
And as well, you talked about the throat. And I remember when the weirdness would build up, and what I would do is I would end up calling a friend, and they would immediately hear that sound in my voice. And after a few minutes talking to the friend, it would dissolve and I would feel better. So some of those physical symptoms can also, you can be intentional about trying to rid yourself of them.
Or allow them with more acceptance as opposed to being frightened or trying to push them down. So thanks for sharing that, because I just love how you remembered those sensations. You can't forget them in a way. And what you did was call a friend, which is an amazing thing to do. And at the same time, we can comfort ourselves. We can do that for ourselves if we have those skills. And if you think it's a good time, I would love to guide everybody through identifying their own stress profile for grief. Is that okay, Susan? What do you think?
Absolutely.
So if you have a sheet of paper, you might want to write this down afterwards. But what I'd like to do is just take 3 or 4 minutes and guide you through identifying your personal stress profile for grief. Okay. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to ask you to do so that it doesn't trigger you, with a lot of emotions. And you can do this with your eyes open or your eyes closed. And if you don't want to use grief, you can use any strong emotion, but I'll guide it through for grief. Okay, so let's just start by getting in what I call a mindful position, which is basically sitting up straight, if that's comfortable for you, with a long, strong back. And again, settling into your body, you might want to move your shoulders or just, I like to roll my neck a little bit. And looking down or closing your eyes if you feel comfortable and safe. And taking a couple breaths. And calming breaths, the most calming breaths are when you exhale longer than you inhale. So if you want to calm yourself down, if you're a little bit anxious about this, just breathe out about twice as long as you breathe in. Okay. And I'm going to ask you to bring to mind a situation where you might feel some grief. And if you can, try not to bring the most extreme situation to mind. Bring something that you can practice with. So on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 3 or a 4, so that, and maybe it's something like you lost your wallet or you lose your keys, something that's emotional, but it's not the worst, just so that you can experience this and understand. But if it's something that happened a long time ago, maybe you're able to work with that if it's a little stronger emotion. Okay, so imagine that as vividly as you are comfortable with. So where you are and who you're with, and sounds and colors. And imagine what thoughts you had. What were some of your go-to thoughts about that situation and your ability to get through it? And if you want, you can write these down it's easier. What were some of the feelings associated with it? With those thoughts in the situation? A little bit deeper than grief, like if it's sadness or anger and so on, those kinds of words. What did you feel like doing? What did it make you want to do or say? And then ask yourself, what did you feel in your body? And see if you can come up with 2, 3, 4 things at least that you were feeling in your body. See if you can become familiar with what you felt in your body, especially, but even your thoughts, your urges. And when you're ready, just taking a couple breaths, really exhaling longer than you inhale, just to let it all go. When you're ready, opening your eyes, coming back. So just raise your hand if you could feel, if you could document what you felt in your body, or you had thoughts you could identify. Okay. So what we were thinking of doing here is putting you into breakout rooms so you could share not necessarily what the grief was, but share your stress profile, share like especially what you felt in your body as a way to normalize and to understand that what you're feeling in your body can be very powerful. And you might get some ideas when you hear what other people's stress profiles are, so that you then can just share this and understand what a stress profile is a little bit deeper and how it works. And then when we come back, we'll ask one or two people if they'd be willing to share their experience, and then we can use that for everyone to relate to as a large group. Okay, so we're going to divide you up into rooms of 3 people, and let's see, there's 24 people, so that's going to be 8 rooms. And the way this often works the best is each person gets 2 minutes to speak. And so that they can actually go through their stress profile, what they felt in their body. That's the most important, if you can identify that. And then your thoughts or your urges. And then, so that will, okay, so if somebody can't talk, that's fine. Just, you don't even have to go into the room if you don't want to. You don't have to accept that. Okay, but every 2 minutes we'll send you a message and let you know to change speakers. Okay, so here you go. Okay, so I am going to, did everybody go into a room? Oh my gosh.
It looks like it.
Okay, let me just set my timer. I mean, after this, I'm going to chill out and we'll just sort of talk a little bit. Do you feel like it's too controlled?
Are we able to be heard, you think?
No, we're not.
I think
Except
I want to hand it over to me. I'll interrupt.
Okay. Sarah, you connected us, remember?
I know, isn't that, I can't believe it's 8 years ago.
I know.
Time is so, I don't know.
And Susan didn't know that I was actually reaching out to her. She thought I was mistaken, that I was meaning to call somebody else.
Yeah.
And Susan, it's been over 8 years of us saying we should go get a margarita. I mean, that's terrible. We need to rectify that.
Yeah.
Can I come for margaritas? That sounds
absolutely.
We're all invited to the noisiest, busiest place we can find.
Yeah. A bit, yeah, that's funny. Okay,
We're coming
that's
to
kind
time.
of exciting. We'll wait. We have a couple rooms are just joining us. Here they are. Okay, welcome back. Gosh, I'm pretty excited to hear what you might have uncovered about your stress profile. Would anybody be willing to share your experience for all of us? So maybe we can just take a look at it together.
Also write it in the chat room if you want to.
I'm willing to share, Susan.
Oh, thanks, Brenda.
Yeah, and I had some recent grief that like reminded me exactly what that feels like too. But for me, it's like an extreme heaviness in my chest and a sort of a stomach ache and just like constant tears at the at my eyes ready to come out and sometimes coming out. But
Wow. That's an amazing description. So had you ever put it together like this before?
I think especially because in January, I lost a loved one, and it was like reminded right there. As soon as I heard the news and had those feelings, like, oh yeah, that's how grief feels to me. But yeah, it's just very clear every time.
I'm really sorry that you went through that. And I'm just kind of curious that you recognized it. The idea of learning your stress profile is so that when you experience it, it doesn't pull the rug out from under you. And so it's, yeah, I know what I'm going to go through. I know how long it's going to last, sort of. And I know that I can sort of ride that wave and get through it. That doesn't mean it's not painful, because it is. But the idea then is that, oh, I can get through this. I'm familiar with it. I felt it before. And you actually said that.
Yeah.
So was that grief, those feelings the same that you felt for grief in another situation?
Absolutely identical. And I was even sharing with Laura and Sarah that this loss was the longtime, partner of my mom, and she had lost my father, back when the two of them were 57. She's now 81, and she's alone in Florida, so she's going through this in some isolation. And she was saying that, she was feeling all those same feelings, but because she had gone through it before, she knew that she just had to work her way through it, and on the other side she would be okay. So it was like reassuring to me to know that she was thinking of it that way. She wasn't panicking. She was just like, I just have to get through this.
That's so beautiful. That's really beautiful.
So
the goal is not to get rid of the grief, but to make it easier to move through it compassionately. Yeah. Sorry, Susan, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say the metaphor of waves is so appropriate, because unfortunately you don't know when that next wave is going to pull you under. But after you've been pulled under a couple of times and you've come out the other end, the waves get more elongated in terms of when they come. And I think that's what builds resilience, is knowing you've gone through the worst and then you come up on top again, and that you can do it again. And I think that's, for me, when the pandemic hit, I was upset about it because my life was getting stopped again. But on the other hand, I feel like I've been able to manage the pandemic in a different way, perhaps than other people, because I know that this too will pass.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing, Brenda. There's that impermanence. Things don't last forever. Joy doesn't last forever, but neither do the strong, difficult emotions. But
and I have to say the combination of emotions is also part of the stress profile of many of us, because we can feel sadness, and we can feel joy, and we can feel fear, and we can also be courageous, and we can be frustrated, and we can be blissful. And sometimes they all come at the same time. And that's, I think, where we say the word bittersweet, right? And I think that it's a hard concept for people to understand, that you can hold like two rocks of different opposing emotions in your hands at the same time. And that is just the way the world is.
Would anybody else like to share about their experience? What you discovered, or any questions, things that you're just wondering about?
I can share. Hi, everyone. Sarah Keeley, and one of the things that I found interesting, I've known Susan for a long time, and again, my daughter was a good friend of Laura's too. We played a lot when they were younger, and I think that Susan was the first person I knew that experienced a loss of a child, and it was very hard to understand your loss at that time. Since then, I've had other friends, unfortunately, but just the reaction that, well, Susan talks about a lot of that in her book, but the physical reaction that you were talking about earlier, when I lost my mom, it was quite suddenly and out of the blue. And the physical reaction, what it did to me, is every time I thought about her, or little things that would remind me of her, took my breath away, and it choked me, like suddenly choked me, and then I'd start crying. And I never thought I'd, work through that. But a year later, maybe it started to change a little bit, but it took me a good year to not have the loss of breath, and just little things. I'd walk through a room and see an orchid, and all of a sudden it would just choke me. And my dad was still alive at the time, and he just wanted to go and be with her. And so, when he did pass away 3 years later, it didn't choke. It didn't have that same effect. So I know these different, and other people that I've lost, and animals that I've lost, and all these things, but every one of them's unique. Every one of them is different. And I always wonder if that'll happen to me again, or if that'll repeat itself, and maybe not in the same way. It's all the factors, because it's a physical thing too. It's not only my breath, but my whole body, and my, just completely wreck. I let go of everything emotionally, but it's very interesting what it does to your physical being when that happens.
Yeah. So the body has a way of showing up similarly time after time. So, and that's very different than our thoughts. So grief, like you have one grief profile for your mother, another grief profile for your father, and maybe you have multiple ones for different situations, and depending on what maybe the leading. And so the reason we rely on the body is because it keeps showing up similarly for that situation, whereas thoughts are very, very different. Just think about, a friend or a spouse, like someone you love, but then maybe they do something that sets you off, and momentarily you're like, I'm really mad at that person. And where's the love? The love is gone. Now you're mad, or things like that. And so the mind is much less stable, and you can't always count on, well, do I love this person, or am I mad at this person? It's hard to hold both, like you talked about having two emotions, Susan. It's hard to hold them both, but the body is much more linear and sequential. And so that's why for a stress profile, we want to rely on the body. It's not that the thoughts aren't important, but you can count on becoming on the body showing up the same way.
Well, and the concept that grief is such an individual journey based on who you've lost, when you've lost them. Sometimes like a grandfather will die, and the reality, and then that triggers other griefs from earlier on in your life that you never dealt with in a healthy way. And so what I've learned is that grief is such an individual journey, and that even if you have a huge circle of friends and a network of support around you, being willing to accept that help is extremely important, being intentional in how you grieve, but also you are ultimately alone in that grief, and you're the one that has to figure out how to move forward in your life and integrate that into your identity. So it's such a combination of feelings, grief. Susan and I were talking while everyone was in the breakout rooms about how grief is really, it is the whole range of emotions. And sometimes when I give talks about grief, I've learned that some people won't come to them because they think it's going to be morose and really sad and disturbing. And what I've learned is that I like being in the grief space because it's just talking about living in a healthy way. It's something that we all will experience, grief. I mean, we will all experience loss and disappointment, but if we push the feelings under the rug, they're just going to keep bubbling up again and again. And so I think what I've learned, and actually why I titled my book Permission to Thrive, is that I realized there was no one else but myself could give myself that permission to not only grieve, but to be okay, to be beyond okay, and to perhaps ultimately thrive at times and experience joy. And I don't think that that's something that people think about often when you think about grief, or when you think about a mom who's lost their daughter suddenly to a brain tumor. And I had to learn, like, what did society want from me? What should I do? How should I behave? Where was the book to tell me what to do when a 14-year-old dies suddenly from a brain tumor? And I had to learn to model what I needed for myself. So it's like, it's trusting that intuition that I know Susan knows so much about, trusting your gut to say, there is no rule book for this, and I need to trust my gut and tell other people what I need from them to help me heal.
So, Susan, I just want to respond to you. I think what I heard you say was, you give yourself permission to be in the space of grief when you feel grief. But when you're feeling joy, you also give yourself permission to feel the joy, so that you're not pushing anything down or away. You're letting it come and go. And moving through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And not feeling guilty that because my daughter died, I can no longer feel that joy. One shouldn't negate the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But often I think we think that if someone close to you dies, that means that you're going to have a life full of misery for the rest of your life. And I have to mention that, about a week or two after Laura died, I had lots of friends and family around, and one friend, in a very well-intentioned way, said to me, Susan, don't worry, you'll smile again one day. And that caught my throat. I mean, all I could think of was, oh my gosh, I've already smiled and I've already laughed, and it's only been a week since her death. And why is that? Because there was the Shiva, and there were people around me, and people were telling stories about Laura, and it's life keeps going on. And what I heard from her is, Susan, the ceiling of your happiness will be a smile. And I didn't want to accept that for the next 40 or 50 years of our life. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So the grief is not forever. The grief comes and it peaks and then it goes away. And that's where you fit in the smiles. But then the grief comes back.
And I would say that the grief never goes away completely, just like love never goes away.
Okay.
Some of the most beautiful quotes is grief is love. Grief is love with no place to go.
Mhm.
And I think over the past 12 years, I've been able to absorb Laura into my being in a way that she feels like she's part of my DNA now. And I often joke that I think about her more often than I think about my 2 living daughters. I don't tell them that, but you know, I think part of grief is that it changes your identity, right? So part of the grief is you're sad about the person didn't get to live the life that you hoped that they would live, a full, long life. And the other piece of the grief is sadness about what you lost in your life. And I think in order to grieve in a healthy way and to move forward, you have to integrate that loss into your new identity moving forward and have compassion for yourself. So some of these topics that Susan brings up, they're just like ringing in my head, how much they resonate with me.
I saw so many heads nodding when you said grief is love, sort of transformed.
Grief is love with no place to go.
With no place to go. Would anybody like to comment on that? I see so many heads nodding. Grief is love with no place to go.
I'll share. I think many of you know I lost both my parents within a year and a couple months, not too long before COVID. And this whole year of being home, basically, they keep coming to me in dreams, and it's been really hard for me. And sorry.
That's okay.
Hearing what you just said, Susan, I feel like now I have a place I can put that. Maybe they're coming to me so that I can keep them in my DNA, and I've been scared about them coming to me, but now I need to transform that, that really resonated with me. Sorry, I can't talk, sorry.
That's okay. Take your time.
Sarah,
Maybe they want you to know that they're okay.
Sarah, can you hear me? Okay, I'm not on the screen for some reason. The screen isn't accepting me. I so resonate with what you're saying. My parents passed away 16 and 10 years ago, and I still have that happen to me. And every time I do now, I'm so grateful that I can see them. I see them in color in my dreams, and I take it as a sign that they are always with me and that I am constantly loved and supported by them. And when I grieve for some other type of activity I'm going through, I pray to them, and I know they're there and they give me great strength. So as you just said, transforming that into something that supports you and making that into a lovely, cherished moment will get you through for the rest of your life. And I said 10 and 16 years ago, I still grieve over my parents. They were wonderful parents. They made me feel so loved, and they taught me how to love others. And so if you can take that moment, as you just said, and transform it, it will have an incredible, wonderful effect on your life. And I will pray for you, and I really wish you the best. It's so hard to lose your parents.
Thanks, Jill. That was really beautiful.
I totally agree with that. And I think this generation, all of our children, I try to instill what it means for traditions. And so I took the opportunity during these months at home. My parents left a lot of their things to me. I took pictures of all the things that they gave us. And my mom had a beautiful jewelry collection that I was fortunate enough to receive after she passed away. So I took pictures of all those things that were her mother's, and just the history behind everything. Took pictures of everything, wrote the details on the back of each picture of what the things were. Now, my mom always had this great expression, you can't reach out from the grave. Meaning you can show them, but you can't make them keep things. So I'm going to be, when I'm long gone, they'll have the information, but they'll know that their great grandmother bought something in an antique shop, whatever it is. It just gave me a lot of joy to write down what each thing meant. My mother had these beautiful lamps that in Florida, if there was an impending hurricane, she would put them in the closet. And to me, anybody that takes lamps and puts them in the closet for fear that they're going to be broken, that means something. So again, it's just because this generation of children, where they're ordering everything online and this and that, whatever, it just could down the road mean something to them, that they have something of their grandparents, possibly they're even something that belonged to their great grandparents. And they'll be like, wow, you know what? This was from X, Y, and Z, and it came from a great place or whatever it is. So it's just a great thing to do if you can document it. We put the photographs in our safe deposit box, and when we're gone, it'll be written and documented, and they'll know what these things are. So
Dika, I love what you're saying, and I also think that same concept can be done through stories, just even oral stories.
Yep.
And talking about the person who passed away. And I think that's something we don't do enough of. And we learned pretty quickly to just talk and joke about Laura to the other girls and to whoever else would listen. So it didn't feel as though, she was perfect in every way, or that we avoided talking about her. It gave us all really great joy to talk about her. And it's one of the things that I mentioned when I talk about how can other people show up for people who have lost loved ones. And I say, please don't hesitate to talk about the person who passed away.
Well, that's something that Marta Giggle has said for the last 20 years. She just doesn't want anyone to ever forget about her daughter. And so that's what she just welcomes anyone talking about her, or anyone that will listen to her talking about Marta, Marta talking about Brittany.
I think we're always afraid that we're afraid that it's going to make the other person cry, but
Right. No.
I never forget that Laura died. So the fact that you bring her up and talk about your memories with her,
yep,
is just an absolute gift of joy to me.
Well, I have to tell you, I never met your daughter, but I thought about your daughter yesterday when I renewed my license and I became an organ donor. I never was. So it's because of your daughter.
Thank you, Dika.
So
that's a story for another day. That's a story to read in the book.
I think it would be interesting if anybody would be willing to share how you turn towards yourself. If compassion is turning towards your suffering to alleviate it, acknowledging it and then alleviating it, what are some meaningful ways that you turn towards your suffering when it comes to grief to alleviate it? And Susan and Dika just were sharing their unique ways. One is creating a history and the other is talking about the person. Would anybody else be interested in sharing how you turn towards yourself with compassion to soften what you're going through?
I will say, my dad passed away in June. And it's interesting, just today through talking with everybody in our breakout group, I'm realizing that my symptoms, my physical symptoms of grief seem to be aligning with the Jewish practices in mourning. That feeling of shock and your heart and your throat, that was Shiva. The feeling of the air being thick and not being able to move through space easily. That was Shloshim, the 30-day period. And it's been getting easier. And one of my practices is that I do Minyan every night. And I'm saying Kaddish for my dad and saying his name every day. And it's going quickly. It's going to be his unveiling is in May, so it'll be a year in May, in like on the day before his what would have been his birthday will be a year in the Jewish calendar. And this is actually the most emotional that I've been about it in months. So it's, the practice of his memories are more bittersweet now. We can laugh a lot and think of the good things.
Thank you for sharing and trusting us with those feelings. So just as a side, because I really do want to hear from some more people, and I know Susan does, but a couple of things that you can do to soften that in the moment is putting your hand on your heart. So if you just try that, everybody, put your hand on your heart and just be with feeling your own heart beating. And maybe even putting a second hand over that hand. Just notice what that does to your physiology. Here, try this. Try putting one hand on your cheek. And now the other one. Just holding, embracing yourself. As though it's somebody else doing it to you, but you can do it yourself. And then there's another one where you put your hand on your arm. You can't really see it, but just put your hand on your arm and sort of move your hand up and down like you would on somebody else's shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes what I do is I give myself a hug. I grab both arms and I just tighten, and say something sweet to myself.
Susan, I'm thinking about how important some of these things are, especially for people who are living alone, and how I hope that people can learn these types of things. I mean, especially during this last year, how important it is when you don't have that touch.
That's the body doesn't really recognize whether it's you or somebody else touching you. Sometimes it's better when you can soothe yourself and you can, just do that for yourself when you need it. You don't have to wait for somebody to be there for you to move through those emotions.
It's almost like permission to soothe yourself.
That's why I love the title of your book, Permission to Thrive, is just you have permission to get through it, knowing that it's going to come back most likely, but you don't have to stay there. Mm-hmm. And I love that title. It's so powerful. Would anybody?
Can I ask you a question, Susan? Susan and Susan?
I know.
Both lovely Susans. In our group, we talked about, if I can go back just for a second, about those triggers, if you will, when we're feeling grief, your heart racing, your neck tightening up. For me, sometimes my mind gets a little jumpy and it's hard to concentrate and focus. But as we were talking, I realized those are actually safety nets and protective mechanisms for us in some way, if you agree. Maybe without those, we'd be in worse shape. Maybe if we weren't having the throat tightening, or we didn't feel as Ruth and Sarah said, through their tears and pain, those safeguards in a way. Maybe we're safeguarding ourselves when we are sensitive to this is happening. I mean, if nothing's happening, well, how deep does that go? But when something is physically happening to you that you notice, I lost my father 42 years ago and my mother just 4 months ago. One was 63, one was 94, yet I can contact that loss of 40 some years ago with my dad as much as I can my mom, which was so recent. And I'm grateful for those physical reminders, you know, that the love is still there, the pain is still there, the loss is still there, the grief is still there, because of what my body will say to me, so to speak. So in a way, they're good things. They're good things.
They're important cues. So I often call them radar. They're signals, they're cues for you to say to yourself, what do I need now? How can I take care of myself in this moment? And so they're very much a safety net. And again, what do I need? I'm feeling this grief. I need to tell myself it will pass. I need to tell myself, you know, and they're also cues to not isolate yourself, possibly not to give yourself a lot of self-criticism, not to ruminate over things. I mean, you know, I wish I had done this, if only I had done that. That would be examples of rumination. So those are cues that you need to, that you're hurting and that you need compassion, as opposed to that, you know, isolating or ruminating or being self-critical. It's like, how can I hold myself? And Susan gave some examples. Can I call a friend? Well, friend A's not there. Let me call friend B. Friend B's not there. It's not about me. What do I need? I got to keep moving till I can meet my needs. So I call it radar. You know, those are cues, signals that your body's sending you. Please take care of me.
And Susan, the practices that you talk about, these mindful practices of giving pause and being reflective and self-aware of what your body's telling you, you keep reminding me that the practice, and that sometimes you get out of practice. And so I think this is kind of encouraging me to kind of get back to a little bit more of a daily practice, so that I continue to feel good and calm and sane during some of these crazy times.
Yeah.
And I know that we're kind of coming to the end of the time period that we had slated. And I mean, we're definitely willing to talk further individually or as a group. And I am looking forward to doing more of these in the future, because when I've gathered just these two groups, I can sense that there is a need to talk more about all of these feelings, that we talk about grief, we talk about, we just talk about the real, authentic and vulnerable emotions that we all feel, and that sometimes we just don't share them with others. And that's my passion right now. And
yes. So stay tuned to Susan so that you know what she's doing. And I just would like to say, if you're interested in mindfulness, we have online courses now, and teach in person too, of course, through Zoom right now. But
yeah,
stay in touch with us.
that's what I would hope too, is we'd love the email feedback, or if you know of potential people that I can bring on. Of course, I want to bring Susan on a number of times in the future, because I think
We had so much fun.
I think there's so much more to learn, and we really appreciate all of you showing up today. And I hope you guys have a great weekend, and stay in touch.
Take
You
good
too.
care. Be compassionate to yourself.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Sarah.
you.
Thank you. Bye, Bonnie. Bye, Eileen.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye, Mika. Thanks for sharing. See you then.
Bye, Felice.
Bye, Felice.